What do you do when you get to your edge? When you get to the ledge of reason, the ledge of everything that you've come to know in this life as you know it, in the way that you've done business in the way that you know it, in the way that you put yourself out there, in the way that you thought you were. And you realize that at the edge, at the ledge, there's so much more. Welcome back to the Global Movement Summit. We've been having a lot of these different conversations, and we've been having a lot of them offline, and now we're wanting to bring you into the conversation, but actually not just bring you into the conversation, bring you into the activation. Because if we don't, and I say this with so much resistance, if we don't let ourselves go there, then we could become the thing we fear most in this world. The thing that we're fighting, the thing that we're not standing for, the thing that we define as being a failure. It's almost like things just got ripped apart in such a big, meaningful way, and the stakes are so much bigger than they've ever been before. And it takes that all inward, outward, onward commitment to just showing up, to just making it matter, and to really putting things on the radar in a meaningful way. It means going to the edges, going to the darkness, going to the light, going into the everything to get the shift together. And it's gonna be messy. It already is. So here we are at the edge, at the ledge of everything we've ever known. What happens now? Well, I think let's just dive into it, because it's when you started this topic at the Wellbeing Economy Festival, it moved so many people, and I could just see the stirrings in the room of people going, I've never thought of it that way, or it was just this dropping in deeper. And everyone was just saying, like, how can we continue this conversation? They wanted to know more. So I think this will be great to send to all the delegates and to put out into the world.
Yeah, I didn't really have a chance to finish it, as you know, at the Wellbeing Economy Festival. So this would be a good way to get a complete vision, I suppose.
Yeah.
So shall I start?
Floor's yours.
Okay. So basically, Stop, Reset, Go is a simple 3-step process that we've evolved for transforming any situation from harm to well-being. So the idea is quite simple. It just reflects what we do when we recognize harm and we want to be proactive against it. So the first thing is obviously recognize that there is harm being caused, and we stop.
Yes.
The second step is we find an alternative, a different way of doing things that can achieve our ends, but without causing the unintended consequence or the harm. And we test that out, see if that works, and if it does, then we implement the solution. We go. So that's the simple Stop, Reset, Go process, and it can be implemented at any scale and in any dimension of a problem. So basically a general methodology for moving from harm to well-being.
Beautiful.
And so that's quite synchronized to the Wellbeing Economy Festival.
Very much so.
So the basic strategy that Stop, Reset, Go, our citizen collective has developed is a complementary strategy that involves transforming ourselves as human beings on the inside, and then transforming our outer world. So feel that we have to. It's very important to transform what we are inside, our emotions and our thinking,
Yes.
the way we model the world.
Yeah.
And once we do that, then we can have the proper impact in the outside world. So the two steps that we employ to do this, the human interior transformation, we call deep humanity. And we call it deep humanity because we feel that we've had our humanity up till now, but it hasn't been enough to prevent all the perfect storm of problems and challenges we face in the world.
Yeah.
So we need a deeper humanity. So that's where the word deep humanity comes from.
And the world is actually inviting us to go deeper, which is so beautiful with artificial intelligence and
got lots of problems for you. Let's change. So it's inviting us.
It is.
And then the social exterior transformation is something we see in the commons. We see that there's a lot of movement, unconscious movement, I suppose, towards what we call cosmolocalization. So this term was created by a number of researchers in the commons field. And as you know, one of those researchers, Dr. Jose Ramos, who we work with in our network, and he's an active researcher in cosmolocalization. The motto, design global, make local, or manufacture local, is a simple way of thinking about what cosmolocalization is.
Yes.
Using the internet to share open source designs, professional open source designs that are useful, that anyone or any community can download to create their own circular local economy. So with the advent of the internet, we see more and more people moving in this direction already in an informal kind of way. So we're just trying to formalize it and give it a structure, a framework.
Yeah.
So we believe that these two strategies are complementary, and that we think that this can empower and awaken the citizens of the planet to actually drive the system change that's required, rather than just be following the top-down government and business processes, which seem to be going quite slowly.
Yes.
And so there's an expression we are using to capture this inner and outer process of how human beings impact the world. That is, the heart feels first, then the mind thinks, and then the body acts.
Yes, beautiful.
And so we all know this expression: the road to hell is paved with good intentions. A lot of us do. And this is a picture of Syria bombed by the coalition forces, and we thought it was appropriate to say the road to well-being is paved with good intentions. And this screen shows the process that happens in the pilot who dropped those bombs.
Yeah.
So that pilot had a ground experience from his or her individual reality, and values, emotions, and concepts emerged, and from that a decision was made. That decision then moved the process from the inner world to the outer world. That decision caused nerves to fire, the arms and finger to push a button.
Yes.
The button activated an electronic control system, which then activated the doors, opened the doors, and the payload then was pulled by gravity towards the target. And then on impact, it also impacted society and nature. So the pilot felt something and thought something, then acted and caused the impact.
Yeah.
So in the process we're looking at, the deep humanity, we're asking, how can we change this process so that we can act in a way that's not harmful, that's actually towards well-being. What have we done? What are we doing wrong in the world to cause so much harm?
Yes.
It seems like we're trying to achieve well-being, but we end up causing harm.
Yeah. As you said, it's paved with good intentions. We want to better the world, but we're actually doing the other thing.
Yes, we're all we all have this target of well-being. That pilot definitely had that. He felt he was doing the right thing, but it has collateral damage,
Of
and
course.
that collateral damage in the world is becoming so large, it's over superseding the actual good intention. So we're stuck in a super wicked problem, and these are the kind of features of a super wicked problem. Multiple viewpoints. Those seeking to solve the problem are also causing it. There's no central authority. It's diffuse. Nobody can take responsibility. The policies discount the future irrationally. Time is running out. There's no right answer. There's many different answers.
Yeah.
Massive entanglement, of course, like a lot of complexity. It's ambiguous. There are multiple viewpoints, and it's hyper complex. So that's the situation we're in today. And this, at Stop Your Struggle, we've tried to think and feel about why this has occurred.
Yes.
Now, this is a famous graph from Professor Will Stephan, who does research on the Anthropocene. He wrote a paper in 2015 about the great acceleration that we're going through. And these graphs are capture that acceleration. They basically begin in 1700, just prior to the Industrial Revolution. And on the left are the socio-economic trends, and on the right, the Earth system trends. So these show exponential increase in all of these since the Industrial Revolution, and a lot of them since the 1950s. In fact.
Yes.
So this next map is from a researcher at the University of Hawaii. I just can't remember his name right now. But these dots indicate climate departure. These dots are cities on the planet, and they indicate what he called climate departure. Okay. And that's the date in which the climate, the local climate, has become completely different than the recent past. So animals and plant species basically would be in chaos with this different climate that they will find themselves in. This paper was published recently, a few years ago, in Nature, and it caused a lot of controversy. Some scientists say that the dates for climate departure are inaccurate and they should be later.
Okay.
But nevertheless, what the research does indicate is that even though right now at the poles, the Arctic and the Antarctic, you have the greatest amount of change happening. You have a huge amount of change happening in those regions, and not so much in the tropics. What this research showed was that in the tropics, the organisms that are living there are only adapted to a very narrow band of change. So in the Arctic, from summer to winter, it's a huge swing in temperature.
Yes.
And the creatures there, the organisms are adapted to that. But in the tropics, they are not. There's very little change that happens all year round. So any small change that happens will have a much bigger impact.
Of course.
That's what this research has shown.
Wow.
This graph is from the research done on permaculture melting in Alaska. So Dead Horse is a site where they're collecting temperature readings in the permafrost. And what this graph shows is that the change in the temperature readings from 1980 to 2016. And the black lines, the blue and the red, are the air temperature, the ground temperature, and the permafrost surface temperature. So you can see there's quite large variations in that because the air temperature, of course, changes quite rapidly.
Sure.
And the ground surface will follow that, and so will the permafrost surface. But the green line is the permafrost at 20-meter depth, and so that's much smoother because it doesn't change in that erratic way.
Yes, of course.
So, but you can see there's a definite trend of increasing.
Sure. Absolutely. And everything, as we always say, is correlated.
Yes. Yeah. So this is a map showing where that sample was taken. It's research. It has a number of research stations in Alaska. A vertical transect that comes all the way from the northern part, where Dead Horses, where the previous sessions were made, all the way down to the lower part of Alaska,
Wow.
central part.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the researcher who's done the research.
Mm-hmm.
He actually contributed research to a recent report on the Arctic that was just released this week.
Okay.
Vladimir Romanovsky.
Mm-hmm.
He works at the University of Fairbanks, Alaska.
Mm.
And these are some of the things that he said about permafrost. When he started measuring, it was -8 degrees. That was 35 years ago. But in 2015, it came up to -2.5 degrees.
Wow.
So that's almost a 6 degrees warming in
Yes.
a few decades.
Mm-hmm.
And you could imagine in a few decades that it might actually hit zero if we're going at that trend.
Yeah.
So it's quite concerning because that permafrost, once it melts, all that methane is going to be liberated into the atmosphere.
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so he said that the last line on this slide is quite telling. He says, "I told myself that if it would not cool down, I would be 100% believer in global warming." And now he believes in that. So he was a scientist who didn't believe in it, but now
Oh,
his
wow.
research,
Has proven it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm quite fond of reading the works of Charles Eisenstein. He's a contemporary author and activist who talks about this transition period we're going through.
Mm-hmm.
And especially in his book, The Ascent of Humanity, which is free online at his website. He believes in the gift economy.
Mm-hmm.
So he sees this period as a birthing period.
Mm-hmm.
So he sees that in this metaphor, humanity is a fetus.
Yeah.
Human civilization is the womb.
Mm-hmm.
So just like the baby, the womb has nurtured us as we are growing, kept us alive and given us all the nutrients we need.
Mm-hmm.
But at the moment of birth, we feel labor pains.
Yeah.
So these labor pains are the sign that the womb, this space that once nurtured us is too small for us now. It's constraining.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to leave it. And if we don't leave it, then we'll die stillborn.
Just on that, Jade and I met the other day and we were just doing our Wild Waste Fee stuff. But she was at the Ocean Summit just after the Wellbeing Economy. She was invited to go to that.
Mm-hmm.
And she heard a terrible statistic from the head of sustainability from Nedbank, obviously quoting other people's work. She couldn't just remember where the original source was from.
Mm-hmm.
But this image just kind of brought it back for me, is that the chances for the kids being born now to have grandchildren are going to be really limited with the way that everything's going. And they're already starting to call the babies that are being born unwell because of all the things that are already there. And it's such a scary thought that this precious, beautiful being, which is the purest thing on earth, is already coming into the world like this.
Yes, exactly. Well, think of all the, not just human babies, but every living being was once a baby. So there's billions, trillions, who knows how many living beings, not just human, but all species being born right now, and they're all being born unwell.
Yeah.
As an example, this healthy baby that's we used to see a picture of, probably has 100 to 200 toxins in its bloodstream already, just from all of the chemicals that it's absorbed from its mother, right? Because that's already in the environment. We can't help it because it's already there, all those toxins.
Yeah.
So Charles Eisenstein then has this metaphor that this period that we're now living in, the Anthropocene, with all its challenges, is like the labor pain of our civilization. We are in this civilization which is especially since the Industrial Revolution has nurtured us and fed us and allowed us to grow rapidly. But
Mm-hmm.
that growth, like ecologist David Suzuki said, is like a cancer. Now
Yes.
we've consumed everything, and we're about to destroy the host. So we
Mm-hmm.
have to. The labor pains, the contractions are here, and we're being ejected into a new reality. So
Mm-hmm.
we have to go there. We have to move with the challenges, with the pain, and only then can we survive and flourish in this new space,
Yeah.
this new liberated space.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings us to what deep humanity is. Um, the mind thinks, the heart feels. That's the human interior transformation. How do we transform the mind and the heart so that it's aligned with our highest potential towards
Mm-hmm.
well-being, a
Mm-hmm.
holistic well-being? So in deep humanity, we develop a new cohesive story. It's multidisciplinary, meaning it's not just across academic fields, but also moves into contemplative and um, into meditation and
Mm-hmm.
being.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we tried to find what we call the common human denominators.
Mm-hmm.
So, like common denominators in mathematics, we try to find what it is that we have in common, so that we can try to act against this fragmentation that's happening in the world and try to unify. And all of that is to awaken this sense of wonder and awe and magic that
Yes.
is part of life. And
Mm-hmm.
we have to awaken it because we've lost it. We've
Mm-hmm.
lost our connection with what it is to be a living being. And we use what we call being journeys to support um, all of these processes of deep humanity. So
Mm-hmm.
being journeys are not doing journeys; they're being journeys. We look at the common human denominators, which are many, and we try to awaken our sense of wonder of what it is to
Yeah.
be a living.
Mm-hmm.
And we feel that that's important because if we can awaken that sense of wonder, we can displace the artificial wonder created by technology and consumerism.
Mm.
Because we're infatuated by consumerism and novelty and so on, because there is a magic there.
Sure.
There's a magic in the next cell phone, the next iPad, what it can do, augmented reality now, and
Of course.
artificial intelligence and virtual
Mm.
reality.
Yeah, but
So
coming from a space of wonder and almost innocence and intuition from that, you see it much more differently than just the latest fad or the latest functionality. So yeah, it really takes us deeper into what it means to be part of this transition. Or at least
yes,
that's the way I experience it.
hmm yeah, I think a lot of people experience it that way. Just
Yeah.
coming back to simply being in nature.
Mm-hmm.
What?
Yeah.
Okay, we have to do things to live, but there's a magic in just being a human being.
Sure.
Just looking, opening your eyes in the morning, and actually seeing and experience.
Mm.
Oliver Sacks, who died a few years ago, the famous researcher who um, did research on people with abnormal conditions. Um, he actually his works actually, for instance, a woman who mistook her husband as a hat. His research shows how amazing it is to simply see the world.
Mm.
Because people who didn't have that um, ability when they were young, or lost it when they were young, and then vision, that eyesight that was restored, could not see the world the same way that you and I see it.
Mm-hmm.
They could looked at people from a distance and saw them from a high riser or skyscraper, and looked down at people,
Yes. Yeah.
see people as tiny little insects almost, and they
Mm.
just couldn't get how that transformation happened.
Mm-hmm.
How they were tiny and now they're big. you know. So we've done it so naturally. Our brains are so powerful. We've acclimatized to it, and that's part of learning. But for somebody who's new to it,
Mm-hmm.
adult, it's quite astounding.
It can be.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's just the conditioning that the human mind, this amazing ability to condition and to normalize things. Um, it makes us, in a sense, also lose touch with the wonder of reality.
Mm.
So that brings us to well-being then. What is well-being? And well-being makes us think of a whole variety of things like these things here. But
Yeah.
in a sense, we are all isolated, frustrated philosophers
Mm-hmm.
because even though we have all these concepts of well-being, we're puzzled by how to define well-being that includes our own death, our own
Sure.
mortality.
Sure.
As many of us know, who are going through personal um, situations where loved ones might be about to
Mm-hmm.
part.
Mm-hmm.
We have to try to come to terms with what well-being means when we have to consider our own life and our own death.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is the well-being dilemma of a self-conscious animal that author and cultural anthropologist Ernest Becker brought up. He said man is literally split in two. He has an awareness of his own splendid uniqueness and that he sticks out of nature with a towering majesty. And yet he goes back into the ground a few feet in order to blindly and dumbly rot and disappear forever.
Mm.
So a kind of a bleak, kind of atheist perspective of life and death.
Yeah, sure.
And also another quote from Ernest, what does it mean to be a self-conscious animal? The idea is ludicrous if it is not monstrous. It means to know that one is food for worms.
Uh-huh.
So what he's pointing out is the fundamental tension of every human being.
Mm.
On the one hand, we have this survival instinct. So when we see and hear loud sounds and noises, where our body automatically puts us on full alert, ready to fight or flight.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other hand, we have the self-awareness of our own mortality. So one aspect of us is meant to keep us alive at all times.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we go out and work and pay the bills and put food on the table.
Mm-hmm.
The other part says, but we're all going to die anyways. So there's one mechanism keeping us alive, keep us alive, keeping us alive. And the other self-conscious says, but we're going to die, but we're going to die, but we're going to die. So those
Yeah.
two are not, they don't live together. They don't, as you put it, they don't play together nicely.
Yes. No, they don't.
So that made me think of this interesting um, uh, comparison between Western and Eastern philosophy.
Hmm.
Of course, we know to be or not to be, that is the question, come from William Shakespeare. And in the East, the solution is to be and not to be, and not to be. That is the answer. So the West
Oh,
is always
yeah.
a question,
Yeah.
but the East is saying to be and not to be. That in a sense means life and death coexist, don't they? Our life
Exactly.
and our death coexist. For instance, in this very moment that we're talking and we're learning and we're talking about these things, the each moment that goes by cannot go by unless the moment passed. So the moment is born, but the moment dies, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, just take but. To say but, you have to say but,
Mm-hmm.
those three sounds. So if we were just static and it didn't die, we would just be stuck at but
Yeah.
for any phoneme. So you would not have any transition from phonemes, therefore there would be no language.
Mm.
Without
Yeah.
language, there would be no understanding, right?
Mm-hmm.
So without life and death, the moment cannot exist. In other words, life and death are words, they're abstractions that come out of language.
Mm-hmm.
So the power of language that it creates abstractions, but abstractions can make something seem like it exists all by itself, and it
Yes.
does. Like the two sides of a coin, you can't say the head can exist without the tail, because it can't.
Mm-hmm.
Neither can life exist without death.
Sure. Sure. Mm-hmm.
And so death is the elephant in the room, isn't it?
It
We don't,
is very much so.
and it's such an important thing in our lives when people we love are going through it. Our parents, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
it's so meaningful to us. It's so sacred,
Yeah.
that moment. And yet, in our society, how much are we missing by not sharing this with other people?
Absolutely. And even, I want to say, our own metaphoric death. I mean, we're constantly, as our cells are dying, and we're constantly changing. We're moving away from the person we thought we were into closer to ourselves and needing to let go. So there's this multiple layers of death constantly happening. And they're all
Yes.
incredibly scary.
Yes.
They're all
Well,
incredibly scary. To like not be who you always thought you were supposed to be is a big
because we
thing.
say, "Oh, hey, Lena," or "Hey, Gian,"
Mm-hmm.
and by labeling us, we think we're something static.
Exactly.
And we
Mm-hmm.
have memories, we think, okay, I did this when I was young and so on. But we're always changing. We're never the same, like you say.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this attachment to the static idea of what we are, which is really the problem.
Yeah.
If we can see ourselves as a river that's constantly changing,
Yeah.
that is more, then we can relax into that. And then we
Mm.
can actually relax into death, right?
Sure.
If we can see
Sure.
ourselves as this larger entity, which is what we are,
Mm-hmm.
and we're just expressing the universe in its microcosm, in the human body, in our human body, because
Mm-hmm.
everything that we are, what makes Lena Lena, right? What makes
Mm-hmm.
Lena Lena, you could say, breaks down into the physical and the mental and emotional,
Of
right?
course.
We could take it that we could do it that way. So if we say physical, what makes Lena? Well, Lena is this body, this head, these eyes, this hair, and this clothes that she wears, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But then where does all that come from? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Your body is made up of all the food you eat, and where does that come from?
Mm-hmm.
You ingest it, and it comes from outside of you, right? So
Exactly.
every cell in your body came from all of this stuff that you ingested, and this kind of energy that's self-organizing energy of life within your body is organizing all these nutrients through digestion and so on the blood distribution system to actually create all the cells in your body in real time, all the time,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're
Mm-hmm.
always being built. They say that your cells, every cell cycles through your body every 6 months or so.
Yes.
So you're actually if you look at it from a bricklayer's a cellular bricklayer building Lena,
Mm-hmm.
they're actually rebuilding you every 6 months. Right?
Absolutely.
So who are you then? Where are you if you're always being rebuilt physically?
Yeah.
And then mentally and emotionally, where do all the things that make Lena Lena, where do they come from? Like the way you
Mm-hmm.
smile, the way you get angry, maybe, or
Mm-hmm.
the kind of words you use in your language. Where does that come from? That comes from all the influences that came from outside of you. Once again,
Yeah.
right? Your
Mm-hmm.
parents, your friends, media.
Mm-hmm.
So everything that is you is not you in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So this death, this change is really fundamental to understand what we are and the concept of what we are.
Uh-huh.
Do you want to say something? Comment?
No, I'm just resonating with that
Okay.
and
So
feeling it deeply. Being
deep humanity.
journey number 10,000.
So we have these constant stream of reports and studies that are quite bleak, like Earth will face a sixth mass extinction. But this nervous energy around mass extinction, and even if we don't think about the word, we feel it
Yeah.
subconsciously because of all the bad news that's
Mm-hmm.
affecting us on a global level. But that nervous energy actually comes from the nervous energy of our own death, which is
Mm.
also a mass extinction event. Can you see how your death is a mass extinction event?
Of course, it is.
What's becoming extinct? You die.
Well, when you die, your world dies with it. So it feels like the whole world would die in that
That's
process
right.
as well.
Yes. Exactly. So all the appearances, like right now,
Mm.
we're talking and you're listening to me talk, you're
Mm.
feeling things, you're seeing things in the room that you're in. So you
Mm-hmm.
have this full three-dimensional experience of life, but all of that will die. All those will
Yeah.
become extinct when you
Mm-hmm.
die, physically. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there may be something else goes on that is preserved, but at least those will die,
Sure.
right? Because those depend on a physical body.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's important to recognize that nervousness that people are experiencing in the Anthropocene is the same nervousness of the undealt with elephant in the room, our own death.
Mm-hmm.
And so Margaret Mead said this: always remember that you are absolutely unique, just like everyone else. So, so now this quote is actually in the context of our own death is quite um, it's quite profound, because it's telling. You know, when we look at, we always see death. We hear it in the news. People, so and so just died. Some David Bowie died, and so and so.
Mm-hmm.
And so you know, it hits us. And then our parents are dying. Friends are
Mm-hmm.
dying.
Mm-hmm.
When we eat food, we're eating dead things. Right?
Yeah,
Look at the grass; it's yellow and getting more yellow in Cape Town. It's
very
dying.
much so.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So death is all around us, but in a sense, we just have to learn to deal with it. We cope with it. It's part of everyday life. But when it comes to our own death, or those close to us, now it starts to take on more meaning. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so, in a sense, we're unique, just like everyone else. Everything else is dying. How can we extend our feeling of how we respond to death, say our own death,
Uh-huh.
and those we love close to us? How can we extend that to the whole world? How can we
Mm.
have that compassion so that we care for all living beings?
Yes.
So, you know, the Wellbeing Economy Festival, we explored how the economy is the foundation for the crisis we're in. But from a deep humanity perspective, there's something even more profound, and that's things like not dealing with our own mortality.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are the kind of things that we feel are lay at the heart, the true heart of the crisis,
Mm-hmm.
the disconnection with our life and our death.
Mm-hmm.
And Ernest Becker once again wrote this book called The Denial of Death. It's his famous work. He won the Pulitzer Prize for it in 1974. Of course, he won it 1 month after he died, just to make a statement. He was making a statement.
Of course, you would.
um, and so he in this book, The Denial of Death, he basically analyzed death as the institutions of society as all being immortality projects. So what he meant was by immortality projects are projects that we kind of try to imagine that will keep us alive after we die because of the fear of our death that we have not
Mm-hmm.
resolved. Death,
Mm.
terror management is the field, the academic field that deals with this.
Okay.
So we can do a quick exercise here, maybe a being journey.
Sure.
We can call this a being journey. And we can just find out how each of these is an immortality project. So I can start with one, and you can choose one and see how you can
Mm-hmm.
see it as an immortality project. So fame, as an example.
Mm.
You know, if we're famous, if we have a famous work of art, of literature, music, a movie star, when we die, our work will live on.
Mm-hmm.
Other people will see our music, hear our music, see our films, read our books, and we will live on.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a form of immortality after we die. So,
Absolutely.
so you can choose one and see what
I'll
you.
go with beauty, since it was one of the conversations we brought up in the Global Movement Summit. It's this wanting to press the stall button on aging, and
Yes.
how we should be portrayed, and the stigma of age and wisdom, or those kinds of things,
Yeah.
valuing something younger. All of that pretty much in relation to death more than anything else.
Exactly. I actually made a graphic just recently. I sent to some people. I can send it to you later. But it shows, it's a graph that shows how the marketing industry. So this is now related to our marketing and advertising. How, like, for instance, from when you were born to now, right?
Mm-hmm.
You experience beauty. You experience on the magazine covers and
Yeah.
in internet and news, advertising. You experience these young, beautiful people, young, beautiful women,
Yes.
especially. But it's an abstraction because it's always a different face, right? Like when, say, 40 years ago, you saw this person, right?
Exactly.
Greta Garbo or Eva, whatever, you know, these Raquel Welch in my generation. Raquel Welch was
Mm.
famous. Brigitte Bardot, right?
Uh-huh.
So you see these famous faces, and then they're gone. They're there for a few years, and then there's another
Yeah.
face.
The new face
So
of.
yes, so it's an abstraction.
Mm-hmm.
Sports Illustrated. Who's on cover of Sports Illustrated. So it's an abstraction because it's not a real person. But if you were to follow the real person, say Raquel Welch, you'd see how they've actually aged quite a bit. But
Exactly.
of course,
Yeah.
advertising doesn't put Raquel Welch on the cover her whole life, right?
Sure.
So it creates this abstraction. So it's always forcing us to see these young, beautiful faces, whereas in reality, human beings always age, right?
Sure. Yeah. It's a snapshot in a
So
moment of time.
exactly.
Mm.
So religion, of course, if you are a good boy and a good girl, you follow the commandments, then you will get your reward, which is heaven.
Yes.
And you'll live forever, right? In the story of ISIS, the jihadists, we will go to heaven and have virgins all around us.
Yeah.
Courtship and children. Of course, if we have children, they will genetically propagate us even though we're gone.
Mm-hmm. Piece of us
And,
lives forever.
so these are all immortality projects. Business and sports is about control, right?
Yeah.
And that's in contrast to the moment of death when there's no control at all. And we have to let go. So to me, I see life as the whole of life as a lesson of letting go. Every time you have a challenge, right? Every time a challenge appears in life, what's that challenge about? Why is it difficult? What makes it difficult?
It's our
Think of a
resistance
challenge.
to it. It's our fight to it. It's that whole process.
Yeah. We're trying to there's something that we don't want to let go of. We're losing,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
If somebody we love, it's a broken relationship. We've lost that person. We don't want to let go of that person, but we have to in some cases. So it's all about. So life is the challenges are always about what are we attaching to in life, and can we let go of it?
Yeah.
Sometimes it forces us to let go, and it's all these lessons of letting go are to help us at the very last moment, so that we can let go of the biggest thing of all, our own life. Right? Are we going to be ready to let go at the moment of our death?
Yeah.
This applies to everyone except transhumanists. They're going to live forever. So this is a slide that kind of illustrates a being journey, how we apply being journeys in deep humanity. So we can do a being journey here, just a very simple one. Imagining my last moment of life. So and doing this being journey, when we do it with people, we would just simply do a short meditation and try to imagine what it's like to actually be at my last moment of life. Here I am on my deathbed. It could be a sudden accident, but let's say it's not a sudden accident. It could be like we're dying of a pneumonia or something.
Sure.
Well, what is that like? Sometimes nature is kind to us because it gives us pain first before we die, cancer or something, and so eating away our body, so we don't want to be here.
Yes.
Right? So that makes it easy.
Sure.
But sometimes it's not like that. Sometimes we still want to be here. We're clinging to life. We don't want to let.
Very much.
But we don't have time, so for the sake of time, we just skip that. So deep humanity also explores other major themes, such as how we create stories. And creating stories is a really important theme, because it's by creating stories that we can get ourselves into trouble. So, for instance, Donald Trump has a story, and a lot of people don't like that story. A lot of people do like it, but then a lot of people don't, so it becomes divisive. Right? So this slide shows the three blind men and elephant parable, which is common throughout different cultures. And it illustrates how different narratives emerge because this reality we have is experienced in different ways.
Yes.
So one blind man will say, no, the elephant is like this tail. Another one will say, no, that's wrong. It's like this trunk. And another one will say, it's like this tusk, or like this leg, or like this ear.
Mm-hmm.
So each one is right, but each one is partial.
Sure.
So it's kind of this slide illustrates how how two people might see the world in different ways. So there's
Mm.
me, the blue. There's you,
Mm-hmm.
uh, purple.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Awesome.
You
I'll take
see
purple.
me. That's how you see me. I
Mm-hmm.
appear through your rose-tinted glasses in the world.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at you, you appear this way in my rose-tinted glasses.
Mm.
So if we have billions of different people, we have actually literally billions of different narratives.
Of course.
Some of them are major, but they're all different in subtle ways
Mm-hmm.
because we all have different experiences of life. We all feel the elephant in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So this, of course, this creates amazing diversity, which is an amazing thing. But there's a shadow side to diversity, and that's fragmentation.
Yeah.
Right?
Uh-huh.
This is all the conflict.
Uh-huh.
And so I made this little matrix up of that shows how our differences and similarities can be both beneficial and harmful.
Yes.
So when the differences are lead to conflict, such as fundamentalism that then makes people fight, that's harmful.
Mm-hmm.
The similarities can be harmful as well because during the colonialist period of humanity, the Eurocentric view was seen as the view, the reality, and so that was
Mm-hmm.
imposed upon everyone else
Mm-hmm.
around the world. 5 centuries of that, and that didn't work out very well, I don't think.
Yeah.
So what we want to focus is on. So that's kind of the harmful side, but there's a well-being side to that, into
Mm-hmm.
differences, and that's to celebrate the differences. If we learn, if you know something that's different from what I know, then I can actually benefit. Maybe you have a different way of doing something that's
Yes.
actually better than what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
So by sharing those differences, we all benefit.
Mm-hmm.
And similarities are beneficial because we're all human. So if we
Mm-hmm.
can actually leverage what makes us human, we can actually counter the differences that make us fight each other.
Yes.
And
Mm-hmm.
those are the common human denominators of deep humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And so demonizing one person like this person here doesn't help
Mm-hmm.
because that person is actually representative of a whole bunch of other people.
Sure.
So in Donald Trump's case, 58 million other people
Mm-hmm.
sided with him. And so it's really at the level of narratives, of stories, that these differences emerge. It's the symbol making stage.
Yeah.
When we make symbols, we tell these stories, and then we become entranced by these stories. We become so entranced that we become fundamentalists. Then we're willing to die for the stories.
Mm-hmm.
But in essence, all those stories are emergent from our ability to make symbols, and they emerge from our ground experience of reality.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important to penetrate the symbol making layer and go beneath it to understand how it is that we make these symbols, how it is, because unless we know that, then we don't understand that we're attaching to these conventions.
Exactly.
They're so spellbinding, they make us attached to them, and
Yeah.
then we do all kinds of crazy things after that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the common human denominators are the starting point to bring humanity together.
Mm-hmm.
These are some of them here.
Mm-hmm.
They're pretty mundane, most of them. I like that we need to poo, we need to pee.
Sure.
um, Puts it in perspective.
It does.
A friend of mine once told me, some people think they're so good that their shit don't stink.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, that's not true. No matter how much perfume you use, your shit's going to stink.
It is.
So
Mm-hmm.
this is just a few of the ideas that we explore in deep humanity.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to find axioms. This is all working in progress.
Mm-hmm.
These are some of the kind of fundamental concepts we explore: well-being, the concept of sensory bubbles, which is a new concept that we've come up with.
Mm-hmm.
Concentration and diffusion, that's a very important one. Like how we can't take responsibility if we feel that we're doing something that is just minute. We're making such a small contribution, like pollution,
Mm-hmm.
that we don't feel any responsibility. Dunbar's number is the Robin Dunbar was an anthropologist. came up with the magical number 150, which is the number of intimate relationships a normal human being can have.
Mm-hmm.
There's a caveat we can add to this. That's pre-internet age, I would say. Might not be true. Our ability to control the world, to make tools, language, symbol making, modeling the world. So we explore all these different things in deep humanity.
Mm-hmm.
So deep humanity is also kind of an exploration of two different parallel worlds: the sensory, motor, phenomenological world that we inhabit, the movement world, the sensory world, and
Mm-hmm.
then the abstract cognitive world, the world in our mind where we think about things. So it's really important to look at these two worlds as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because with the cognitive world, that's where things like enemies um, exist, or global
Yes.
warming, or
Yeah.
stranger, or rich,
Mm.
or poor. And those abstractions drive our behavior in the world.
They do.
So as an example of the cognitive space, we have this sense of movement. We create the concept of here and there. I'm going to drive there now. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to go drive and see Lena today,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm going to go drive to this event,
Mm-hmm.
that event. But that concept is actually an abstraction.
Mm-hmm.
And we have simulators, uh, games,
Yeah.
simulation games in arcades and so on, that actually leverage this illusion of motion.
Mm.
Actually, quite often I do a being journey where I look when I'm in traveling in a vehicle,
Mm-hmm.
like a car, or I'm walking even, or I'm
Mm-hmm.
on an airplane. I just look at my own body. I just
Mm.
simply look at my own body, my hands,
Mm-hmm.
my arms, and this is a meditation anybody can do. It's so simple. You just look at that to remind yourself that you're always here.
Yeah.
You know, you're not moving.
Mm-hmm.
You're in a local space. That local space is always stationary.
Yes.
You
Yes.
know, your sensory field that surrounds you immediately, it's all still.
Mm-hmm.
So what you experience from a perceptual perspective is this change in the far field,
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
and that's how you can create these simulators.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to realize the level of abstraction that we actually live in.
Sure.
So this is just another being journey that I just spoke about. The next time you're
Mm.
traveling, do a
Mm-hmm.
simple exercise. And so deep humanity, we use the tree as a metaphor for deep humanity. And in the tree metaphor, each human being starts out on the branch of a tree.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we move in the deep humanity journey, we're moving towards the trunk of the tree.
Mm.
So in the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, we're all at these different branches, but the branches all start to converge
Yeah.
and unite
Mm-hmm.
until it finally meets at one branch.
Yes.
And I used this metaphor, this example of the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
If let's say you're in good shape, so you would take this path, the steep path up the
Mm-hmm.
mountain. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not in good shape, so I'll take the shallow path, the more gradual path.
Mm-hmm.
But we both arrive at the same point, don't we?
Sure.
We both
Absolutely.
arrive at the peak to have this beautiful experience of seeing the entire vista of reality. And so this peak is really what it is that we're all aiming for in life.
Mm-hmm.
To awaken to the nature of what we are as human beings, and we want to experience that. We want to have that peak experience of what we are as human beings.
Yeah.
But I can't say to you, hey, Lena, you shouldn't be on that path. It's not the right path.
No.
It's just different,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're all born into different places and times and spaces and cultures, but
Mm-hmm.
we have to understand that all these symbols are just different fingers pointing to the same moon.
Sure.
They're just the moon is the same.
Mm-hmm.
The fingers just pointing, all of us pointing us to the same space. This David Eagleman is a neuroscientist who's created this new, I don't even know what to call it. He calls it possibilianism, quite a big word.
It is.
He
I like it.
he considers himself a possibilian, and he's a very open-minded neuroscientist.
Mm.
He
Mm-hmm.
does not discount religions and spirituality,
Okay.
because it's possible that the answer lies there somewhere.
Mm.
So basically, he's open to ideas that we have not we don't have any way of testing right now.
Mm.
So why ignore them? Why discount them just because
Sure.
we haven't got the means to test if they're valid or not?
Mm.
He's just saying be open.
Exactly. Mm.
And so in deep humanity, we have this.
Which is, which I can imagine is that, or we know actually, is that path to awe and wonder and thing, that radical openness to really seeing
Yes.
things for what they really are.
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So to see things as they really are, that awakens wonder and awe,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
the spirit of playfulness.
Yes.
Because we, as human beings, we are part of the universe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Human nature is nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
The adjective human is just an adjective for nature.
Yeah.
So we are nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just like I said earlier, everything that we are is everything we aren't.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that makes our body, this energetic body, is made by this energy that simply exists in our body, that is like a factory that's putting all the food we eat and assembling it. It's magical, it's a
Mm-hmm.
magical factory that just builds us in real time all the time. So
Mm-hmm.
always transforming the world into us.
Absolutely. And just on that note, it just reminded me of a quote that from the next event that I went to after after Wellbeing, which was Fast Forward Your Business. And Roger
Mm-hmm.
Hamilton was talking about, Albert Einstein, Mother Teresa, all these energies exist. They're
Mm-hmm.
all out there. And,
Mm-hmm.
what will it take for us to make ourselves ready to assimilate those other parts and those other
Yes.
wisdoms? And I thought it was just such a beautiful journey in itself to be able to see that.
Well, we're always learning, aren't we? It's the funny thing is when we grow old, we somehow get stuck. We become fundamentalists. It's like we're kind of like closing the door and saying, okay, no more ideas now. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to be transformed anymore. Right?
Yep.
But
I'm done.
so we have
Thanks,
to
Phil.
we have to be like a child. We have to take the look at our children and see how they are so open to learning and playing.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
In a sense, not playing. Have you noticed that maybe there's a correlation between not playing and not learning? Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
People who are stuck quite often are not playful anymore.
Yes.
Right? So to be playful and to learn go hand in hand. So if we're stuck with our emotions, we're stuck with playing. It's like we're kind of not allowing the flow of the universe to happen in us anymore. Right? Because the universe is always creating. It's creative. It's a creative force. But if we're no longer creating as human beings, if our creative energy is not flowing, if we're not creative, then we're not happy either.
Yeah.
There's no joy. Right?
No, we lose that sense of self, that sense of joy, that sense of life.
Because that sense of joy and life is really just unblocking. It's allowing the free flow of the universe through us, to act through us. And so we have to get unstuck, I suppose. And so in this journey of deep humanity, it's about becoming unstuck. So we take the mundane, like thinking, language, beliefs, experiences, all these things that we know and we just see daily. Every second we experience these things. But how do we transform that into wonder, into play, into magic? So it's becoming unstuck to allow the flow to happen. So to discuss some of the reasons why we become stuck, it's important we introduce this concept of sensory bubble. So the sensory bubble is actually quite simple concept. We're all in a sensory bubble at any moment of our lives. You're in one right now. So I can describe my sensory bubble, and that will give you an example of your sensory bubble. But my sensory bubble, which consists of my 5 senses, and my sense of sight, my vision, my visual field, I can see the wall, I can see the computer, I can see the books that surround me, the printer, the desk. I can see outside the window, I can see the tree. That's as far as I can see. So that in my sensory bubble, that's my visual bubble. My auditory bubble, it's not very big. I can hear you because I have my headset on.
Yeah.
I can hear, sometimes I hear the kittens. I can hear the rumbling of a car in the distance. That's about it. So,
Mm-hmm.
so each sense we have a certain range that we can
Mm-hmm.
experience. So
Yes.
the collective range of all five senses is our sensory bubble.
Mm-hmm.
And, and that's always changing, because if I now turn my head and look to the right, I'll see the sky, which is,
Mm.
now kilometers away, right?
Sure.
So here's an example of what I mean. There's a sensory bubble of this person.
Mm-hmm.
It's an imaginary person,
Mm-hmm.
occluded by this room.
Yeah.
Take the room away. Now you can see the sun,
Yes.
millions of light years away.
Mm-hmm.
Light years away. So our sensory bubble is important in terms of it's an important framework to see how we experience the Anthropocene.
Mm.
So, as an example, each of us are polluting.
Yeah.
When we drive a vehicle, our exhaust pollutes, emits CO2 into the atmosphere. We're also polluting when we're eating certain foods, because there's a carbon footprint.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't actually see these things with our own eyes. For
Mm.
instance, the emissions that we emit, we don't even see them. It's invisible.
Mm-hmm.
We can't experience CO2 at the molecular level.
Yeah.
And yet,
Unless you have a really bad exhaust pipe, then you're like, oh, hold on, something's not right.
yeah. But even if you have a very bad exhaust pipe, it's not like, for a lot of people, it doesn't.
No, you can't see it in relation to everything else.
And you can't, to feel that it's meaningful,
Mm.
to feel, oh, I'm causing harm, and to
Yeah.
stop it.
Mm-hmm.
It's that feeling is not there for a lot of people.
Sure.
So in South Africa, for instance, you see a lot of people who have vehicles that are just pumping out black smoke, and they're still driving.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have a sense that this is harming the environment,
Yeah.
and that's because we cannot sense it, that it's harming the environment. If you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you can sense, even there you can sense the smoke going into the air, but it's not the same thing as sensing somebody coming at you with a gun.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
Because then you can get out of the way, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
When you're, or a fire, like if you let's say your car's on fire, well, then you're going to stop and do something, right?
Mm-hmm.
But just the smoke is not enough for a lot of people,
For sure.
and that's because it doesn't have an immediate harmful impact to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so in our sensory bubble, this we allow these things to harm in these kind of ways to perpetuate.
Mm-hmm.
And but scientists who do have the tools to actually look at these, to measure these things, and to see where we're at with them and the causal relationships, they know that it's causing harm.
Yes.
And for them, because they work with their tools and they're so experienced with their mathematics, it almost becomes like second nature to them.
Mm-hmm.
For them, it's not difficult to believe that this is real.
Mm-hmm.
But for the rest of us, it doesn't appear real, because it's not part of our everyday experience. The experience of the scientist is not the everyday experience of the common layperson.
Yeah.
Right. And so we have this divide that comes about through different sensory bubbles and different knowledge bubbles as well.
Mm-hmm.
And this disconnect allows us to pollute the commons,
Mm-hmm.
to pollute the oceans.
Mm-hmm.
Like the permafrost is melting, but to us it's just an abstraction,
Sure.
right? Because we're not there. If we were there and we're seeing its impact, then we can actually feel differently about it.
Of course.
Now, let's take this sensory bubble concept and apply it to the Industrial Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
So before the Industrial Revolution, we lived in small communities close to the planet.
Yes.
So we didn't have advanced technologies. We had more primitive technologies, and those technologies were by and large non-polluting.
Mm-hmm.
So the combination of small populations along with rudimentary technology meant that it forced us to be sustainable in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so we lived in these closed feedback loops with the planet. And so the indigenous communities lived this way, and a lot of them still do, but they're being brought into the 21st century, of course, by modern technology and modern society.
Mm-hmm.
So then along came the Industrial Revolution, and all that disappeared. Now, instead of living in small communities, we live in these huge cities, like the one you and I live in, and we're all strangers now, more or less.
Sure.
And it's like in those small communities, we had generations and generations of connections between people.
Mm-hmm.
And here in cities, it's very superficial connections.
Yeah.
So we've kind of lost all the social capital that once existed, and
Mm-hmm.
that was a wealth that we cannot easily replicate. So we have
Mm.
these huge numbers of people all crammed into these cities, mostly strangers, and not having social capital allows people to harm each other as well.
Mm. Yeah.
In small communities, people you didn't harm each other because you knew each other quite well.
Yes.
But in large cities, now you can become a statistic. You can become okay. I don't have any money. I can go and steal somebody's cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I
Yeah.
can kill somebody with a cell phone, right? Who
Mm-hmm.
cares? I don't
Mm-hmm.
know them. So there's a disconnect with people, but then there's also a disconnect with the environment, right?
Yes.
Now, where do we get all our resources for living? We go to the supply chain. We go to all the supermarkets, which are connected to all the manufacturing plants.
Mm-hmm.
And so a supply chain of retailers and manufacturers, they're a layer that insulate us from the good earth,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
we don't know what they're doing to the planet. We just having good faith that they're doing something good, and our main concern is buying the goods and services from the supply chain that we need to survive,
Yeah.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
we're totally disconnected from what happens on the other side. And in fact, it's that disconnect that allows all these um, manufacturers to, not all of them, but a lot of them to end up externalizing um, all their social impacts and their ecological impacts.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So in deep humanity, those are important issues to see how we've been disconnected in
Yes.
that way.
Mm.
And deep humanities also looks at how we take two journeys in life: the
Mm-hmm.
personal journey and the other journey. So we have this first journey, the personal life journey, that
Mm-hmm.
each one of us is on.
Yes.
So we are born at a certain time.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, in the present, you and I are in our present moment, but in the future, we're going to die.
Mm-hmm.
So this is our personal life journey. It's immediate, it's direct, it's here and now, it's concrete,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's local. We live in a local community,
Yeah.
and it's high priority.
Yeah.
We prioritize putting food on the table.
Mm-hmm.
But we mustn't forget that we're also traveling a parallel civilizational journey,
Mm-hmm.
because all the things we know, a lot of them we didn't learn by ourselves. They came
Yes.
from our ancestors,
Mm.
and that ancestral knowledge is encoded in all the books, in the libraries,
Mm-hmm.
and everything that other people teach us.
Mm-hmm.
And this journey is not 100 years old; it's thousands of years old,
Yeah.
tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands.
Mm.
It's not concrete; it's abstract. It's there and then. It's
Mm-hmm.
from all over the world, and it was from way
Mm-hmm.
back when.
Mm-hmm.
It's global. It's not local,
Yeah.
and in a sense, it's a low priority because we have to make a living first, put food on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the civilizational journey can coincide with a personal journey if we're doing things like studying. Our work deals with large scale problems or with
Yes.
history, then it coincides. But generally, it doesn't coincide.
Mm.
But it's important to have both of those, to understand both of those, to understand how we arrived here.
Mm-hmm.
They're two entangled journeys. So,
Yeah.
so we have the the two journeys can also be seen as a sensory space journey and a cognitive space journey. So
Mm-hmm.
the civilizational one is more cognitive, it's more abstract because it's no longer here. We have to use ideas to explain
Yes.
how
Yeah.
the past um,
Mm-hmm.
existed.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and
Mm-hmm.
there's the concept of hyper objects, which is important. It's part of the civilizational journey. Hyper
Mm.
objects. Where is it? I'll go back that one frame. Um, see if I can go back. Yeah, here.
Yeah.
Hyper objects. They're part of the cognitive space. Hyper objects are things that are so large that you cannot actually sense them.
Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm.
So in our normal personal journey, we sense things in our life. It's our sensory space.
Yes.
Here's a cup of coffee. Here's my friend. Here's my work.
Yeah.
But hyper objects like climate change
Mm.
are so large that they're not part of the space that we can sense. We can't
Yes.
sense climate change.
The
We can't
fullness of
sense
it.
it on
Mm-hmm.
we can't sense it on two levels. We can't sense it because it's so large, it's a whole planetary, but it's also so small because it's CO2, carbon dioxide molecules. We don't have the senses to actually know that, oh, the parts per million has increased by one.
Yeah,
we can't.
we're not looking at the world through a heat map.
Yeah, we're not built for it.
No. Mm-hmm.
For directly sensing it. So basically, our focus on well-being, if we look at it from a civilizational lens, there we are, this black dot in this huge civilizational space, and we don't give it that much emphasis. We give more emphasis on our personal well-being.
Sure.
Right. So in our personal well-being, our well-being for our lives is much larger than the civilizational space. Right.
Yeah.
That's simply because we have to stay alive.
Sure.
Right? So here's an example of these two parallel journeys and how they impact how we see life, how we respond to it. So gang members in Cape Town growing up, and they grow up in their personal journey, they grow up in poverty, drugs, violence, all these kind of things. This is their personal journey environment, their local community, right? But at the same time, they've gone through a civilizational journey that brought them there.
Yes.
The journey of colonialism, right? If they're so busy just trying to survive and doing their crime, their criminal activity, and so on, that they don't actually invest much resource into the larger abstract civilizational space to understand how they got there as a people. How did the people in Kailicha get there? The Cape Malay. What does Cape Malay mean? Malay means Malaysia, right? So there's a Malaysian influence. So they have to understand to understand how they got there as a people. That gives them insight into why they're there in their personal space, in their personal journey, right? So without the bigger civilizational story, it's you can't contextualize the personal story in a way that actually will open your eyes to the larger problem. So here in the civilizational journey, Christopher Columbus started the whole thing by finding the new world. He triggered the mass exploration of the planet and the mass exploitation of the planet. And so you start seeing all these European colonies being formed over the centuries. On the eve of the Industrial Revolution, 1754, you see Russia expanding immensely.
Yeah, wow.
You see North America being taken over by France and England. Then in 1822, Brazil, which was formerly occupied. Okay, let's just go back one frame. You see Brazil there? They're occupied by Denmark and Portugal, or Spain and Portugal.
Spain and Portugal, yeah.
Basically took over the New World, the Americas in the South and Latin America. But by 1822, they had given up those territories. Brazil became independent. But now, in 1885, you had the Berlin Conference. And this is a conference in which all the European powers came together to decide how to carve up Africa. So then after the Berlin Conference, now if you look in Africa, you see all this colonialism in Africa.
Yes.
Right? And so then World War I, World War II, and you start seeing people fighting for their own independence. So here, Africa's less colonized. Now, 1974, it's almost decolonized. But the impact of colonialism, just because you freed yourself, doesn't mean that the impact is gone.
Yes, of course. It's written into the history.
And into the actual economic structure.
Yeah.
So 100 million kilograms of silver from Latin America was used to actually finance the Industrial Revolution. So colonialism financed the Industrial Revolution. And on the lower graph, you see that there's an estimate that was done by Jason Hickel, quoted it. He didn't do it, but he quoted it in an article for the Mail and Guardian. The quote calculated just for the North American colonies, the slave labor at minimum wage at 225 million hours, and that
Wow.
was in today's financial terms, that's $97 trillion, which is
Wow.
more than the total global economy's output today. And that's
Mm.
not counting all the death, loss of life as well, and the disease and suffering. So how do you put a price tag on that?
Sure.
So the legacy of that is, of course, it's in the generational inequalities inherited, because when the slaves were freed and the countries were decolonized, the wealth did not get transferred back. There was no compensation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if you look at this graph of the United States, now you have 46 million African Americans today
Mm-hmm.
out of the total population. So the population of slaves has increased dramatically. But if you
Mm-hmm.
um, look at the graphs, they show the poverty rates. You see the poverty rate is the highest for blacks in
Mm-hmm.
America.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that comes directly from the inherited generational inequality. When the slave
Mm.
owners freed the slaves, they didn't give them any compensation of any kind.
Yeah.
Look at Brazil, today's population, 97 million of the people are Afro-Brazilian, over half the population.
Mm.
And once again, you can look at the graph on the right, it shows the poverty levels. Once again, that's inherited.
Mm-hmm.
And of all indigenous people, they only constitute 5% of the whole planet in population terms. But in terms of a fraction of the extreme poor, in the rural poor, they're 1/3.
Yeah.
So it's hugely disproportionate.
Mm-hmm.
So the Industrial Revolution is something that accelerated the major disconnections in the world.
Mm.
It disconnected us from ourselves and from nature,
Mm.
and from this it just results in all this disconnection.
Yeah.
So here we put this in perspective that we are just one. This is a species perspective now. As
Mm-hmm.
human beings, we are one of 8.7 million species. Um, uh,
Mm-hmm.
this research from 2011 just did a tally of how many species there were on the planet.
Yeah.
We're just one of those.
Mm-hmm.
So in the evolutionary tree of life, we're just a very minute branch.
Sure.
So from a bioethical point of view, what gives us the right to dominate 8.7 million other species?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Uh, Jacob von Wexkel uh, came up with this concept called Umwelt. And the Umwelt is the subjectively defined as the subjectively defined, the subjectively perceived surround world of the organism. So any organism has an Umwelt
Okay.
that experiences the world with. So you and
Mm.
I, as human beings, we have an Umwelt. We have our
Mm-hmm.
five senses. From those five senses, we experience the reality our way.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of interspecies inequality, we need to understand that all species have a unique way of understanding the world. They have their own Umwelt.
Mm.
So in our Umwelt, we experience visually only a very narrow spectrum of the electromagnetic radiation.
Sure.
And we also experience a very narrow part of the auditory spectrum.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
We
We do.
do. So there's other creatures that can hear far more than we can.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Jacob von Wexkel studied the tick's Umwelt.
Mm.
The tick is blind and it's deaf. It can detect CO2 unlike us. So maybe if we actually had those detectors, we could actually feel more urgency of
Sure.
CO2. And the tick has a refined sense of smell. So tick
Mm.
it'll be drawn by the sun to go up a branch, and then it'll just hang around there for years, waiting for a prey to come by. It
Mm-hmm.
senses the heat field of the prey, and
Mm-hmm.
also can detect the CO2. And then when it's at the right time, it drops itself onto its prey.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how a tick lives its life. And from a tick's perspective, it doesn't know there's a moon or there's weather or birds. or noises. So
Mm.
the world, according to Jacob von Wexkel, the external world is as good as non-existent.
Yeah.
The text. So when we in science we have this concept of objective reality,
Mm-hmm.
the moon, weather. But if a tick cannot experience the moon or weather or birds, then how objective is that reality?
Of course. Of course.
So what is it that we can sense and what can we not sense? So
Mm-hmm.
that we cannot sense. We have scientific instruments that allow us to go beyond our sensory organs, but there are things that even we don't have instruments for a lot of things even today.
Sure. We don't.
Next year you'll find that we have an instrument that we created for some aspect of reality that we didn't even know existed, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the reality that we occupy, what we think is reality, is also quite limited.
Mm. Of course. So here the Styx coming along and he literally thinks he rules the planet.
Yes. Well, he might not think he rules the planet, but this is the way he's the we're the three blind men. We experience reality in all our ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
So not only limited by our senses, but the sensory bubbles, our sensory.
Yeah, of course.
So those two means constrain how we respond to the world, how we.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been talking about the Industrial Revolution and the harm that it's caused, the disconnection, but it's also, the Industrial Revolution is known for making machines and this automation, but it's also turned us into robots.
It has.
It's also made us into machines, because when we're like these ladies here, when we are working in an industrial plant, we don't have any emotions, do we?
No.
We try to humanize it by talking to our neighbors and so on, but we have to focus on the task at hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's kind of if you watch factory workers, it's very monotonous work. It's very
and even like corporate cubicle natures, it's like you only exist in that little box and you perform out those tasks, and that's very robotic in itself.
Do you remember that video that's been going around? Have you seen that video of the mice, the cartoon?
I don't think I have. I'll look it up.
Okay, you'll have to look it up. It's quite nice. It shows this automation of human beings.
Oh, great.
On the other hand, it's really interesting because we have to be automated in order to function, to learn. Right now, for example, you and I are talking. We're in real time. I'm saying something, you're understanding it. You're saying something, I'm understanding it in real time. That all is made possible by years and years of language learning. So if you think back to when you started learning language, how difficult it was to understand a phoneme and how to pronounce words and so on. It took years for us to do that. And it's like driving a car, driving a stick shift. It took years for us to learn how to do that. So in the beginning, when we don't understand something, it's very labor intensive. It's very linear. It requires all our attention. It's when we learn it, we've automated it. So that automation, but it makes these things possible, these higher cognitive functions possible. But at the same time, it makes us lose touch with reality in a strange kind of way. Right? So the Industrial Revolution has had this impact of squeezing the wonder and the sacredness and the magic out of life, and replacing it with the mundane and with just survivalism in this industrial society. So we turned all these things into their analog. The wonders become mundane. The extraordinaries become the ordinary. We had meaningful activity now to work to survive.
Yeah.
We had authentic magic by just being a human, to contrive technological magic of cell phones and things like that. And human beings have become human doings.
Very much.
And will business save us? Richard Branson thinks that's climate change. If we make it a business opportunity and make money from it, that's what's the key. Paul Hawkins thinks that business is destroying the world with flair, expertise, and panache. And researcher Christopher Wright and Daniel Nyberg wrote a recent book and paper showing how we can't really rely on corporations to find our way out of the climate change conundrum. So will global leaders save us? Well, if the proper ones come about, maybe we have a chance. But who's driving the bus right now? Of course. We know in the United States who's driving the bus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And will progress save us? I mean, enlightenment, the age of enlightenment came about because it was a refutation of the authoritarianism of the church and of dogmatism.
Mm.
People didn't think. And so people like Immanuel Kant said, dare to be wise, dare to use your mind, which was right. We had to think.
Yes.
Because we were just subjugated all the time by kings and by the church and told what to
Mm.
do, and that was not
Mm-hmm.
healthy. But there's a progress trap as well with thinking and liberating that.
Mm.
How we got here was through ingenuity, through human ingenuity.
Mm-hmm.
Our ability to reason, coupled with our five senses and our ability to make tools, are the basic ingredients for progress.
Yeah.
So that includes things, not just hard things in the world, physical things, but also things like language.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Because language has evolved it's a tool that came about as well from earlier tools,
Mm-hmm.
all these things.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been basically spoiled by progress. Um, my the car that I drive, this 2004 Ford Fiesta, is rated at 67 horsepower. But to put that in context, that's actually 67 horses towing us.
Yeah.
You know, the
Mm-hmm.
power of 67 horses towing us in this humble little car.
Mm-hmm.
Other people have like 100 horsepower vehicles.
Mm.
So there, Navigant did a research study that estimated 1.2 billion light-duty vehicles on the road in 2014, which is equivalent to 80 billion horses on the road.
Wow.
You
Mm.
imagine how much horse manure that would create. I just
Exactly.
I just
Mm.
contextualize to make you think about the kind of power we have at our disposal when we go to the grocery store.
Yeah.
You know, do we really need 67 horses to actually go pick up a loaf of bread?
Sure.
So just as GDP has become gross domestic problem,
Mm-hmm.
progress has evolved into progress traps.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we'll just discuss what a progress trap is because it's a really important concept to understand how we got here. Have you heard of the idea of Indra's net from the Hindu religion?
No, I haven't.
This concept of Indra, the goddess who has a net, and the net is this everything in the universe is connected to everything else in the universe.
Okay.
So to see the universe in a grain of sand,
Yes.
for example, we're all interconnected. Everything's interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
This is a Moore diagram. John Moore was a American naturalist who lived around the turn of last century, and he basically explored the interconnectedness of nature, of living species, species and ecosystems.
Mm-hmm.
These Moore diagrams, this one is one of a habitat in New York, what the indigenous people used to call Mannahatta, interconnecting all the many species that live there.
Okay. Wow.
Now, Alexander von Humboldt was a German explorer who changed the face of science by going on this 5-year journey to the Canary Islands, in which he wanted to explore the interconnectedness of nature.
Mm.
And he made these amazing illustrations, kind of the first infographics that really illustrated how all these different species interconnected in nature. This is the Moore diagram once again. But in contrast to the infinite levels of interconnectivity of nature, we have the finite knowledge of human beings.
Sure.
So to illustrate how a progress trap works, we take this example of two different parts of nature. Petroleum, also known as rock seep oil, because it was people noticed that some of these rocks had oil that seeped from them.
Mm.
So they called it petroleum. And liquid fuel. There were liquid fuels that were created, like kerosene, that people used for the source of lighting, as an example.
Mm-hmm.
So these two things were separate,
Mm-hmm.
and until this Polish engineer chemist named Ignacy Lukasiewicz discovered a connection between the rapeseed oil and liquid fuel. And the connection was he actually developed a process to refine petroleum into a liquid fuel that could be used by human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, he created petroleum. And
Mm.
after he created it, then they had to do some testing to make sure that it was safe. And that requires looking at how this refinement process affected different parts of human nature to make sure that it
Mm-hmm.
didn't cause harm,
Sure.
didn't cause an explosion, for instance, or pollution at that time. And once that was verified and confirmed, then they had the blessings of everybody in society, and they went ahead and created refining plants all over the world. And of course, we know what happened: the explosion of petroleum and
Mm-hmm.
internal combustion engine. But in 1960, then another chemist named Charles Keeling in Hawaii um, connected this process to another part of nature.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that nature warmed globally when you burned fossil fuel.
Mm.
And the rest is history, of course.
Of course.
So that's an example of how progress trap works. Basically, you have nature is infinitely connected.
Mm-hmm.
Human knowledge is finite. It's always growing.
Sure.
So when you develop a technology, you have to, at a certain point, you're funded by a certain amount of money and a certain amount of time, and you have to have a cutoff point where you say, okay, that's it. I've done sufficient research.
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to build this technology or not? Is it safe? Is it
Yeah.
useful?
Mm-hmm.
If you answer yes to both those questions, then you go and you produce it, and there it is out in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And if it is useful, then it'll multiply everywhere,
Sure.
right? But the
Mm-hmm.
question about whether it's safe, now the answer might change in time, because just as we saw with Charles Keeling,
Mm-hmm.
scientific progress is always advancing, and the
Of course.
discovery of other relationship is made, and then you find that it's not safe.
Yeah.
So in Charles Eisenstein's book, The Ascent of Humanity, he talks about progress traps.
Mm.
And the cover of the book is the Tower of Babel, a painting by Peter Bruegel from 1563,
Mm-hmm.
which shows how, while the base is being eroding, the tower is still being constructed.
Yes.
So this is an illustration of how, with technology, even though technology is causing all these progress traps that are causing harm,
Mm-hmm.
we're still trying to use technology to solve those problems.
Mm-hmm.
So the question then is, will those new technologies cause more unknown, unintended consequences?
Mm-hmm.
So problems fixed by technology creates new problems,
Yeah.
new technological problems.
Mm-hmm.
And this recursive process leads to more and more problems.
Mm-hmm.
Ronald Wright wrote a book called The Short History of Progress, and a movie was made by the BBC called Surviving Progress.
Mm-hmm.
And Ronald Wright says, we are running 21st century software, our knowledge, on hardware, our brain, our body, that hasn't been upgraded for 50,000 years. And this lies at the core of many of our problems.
Mm.
So to illustrate what he means by that, we use this example of technology as an amplifier.
Yeah.
So before, when you want to talk to your neighbor, you just had to go and talk to him.
Mm-hmm.
And then the phone was invented, so then that allowed you to talk to people around the world.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the internet, which also allowed you to do that, but now connects everybody,
Yeah.
many more.
People
So
you didn't even know.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have false information, you can spread that false information around the world in a second.
Sure.
Now, before you had war, we've always had wars,
Mm-hmm.
and people used to use things like knives and stones and spears. Then we had guns and gunpowder and
Mm-hmm.
cannons, and now we have nuclear weapons and biological weapons.
Mm-hmm.
So each advancement in weapons technology means killing more people efficiently, according to weapon designers. Right?
Yeah.
So now you have the situation where these biological and nuclear weapons can destroy all of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
So one person with one button can actually destroy the entire human race.
Yep.
And then planes and cars
Mm.
allow us to move around the world like planes can allow us to move around the world in a day.
Mm.
So we basically, with technology, we shrink the world, we shrink time, we shrink space, we shorten our reaction time.
Yeah. We really get to move over to this culture of instant gratification, except most of the time it's actually not gratification we get because of the negative consequences of our actions.
Yes, it's kind of it's dominated by a lot of negative things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So this exponential knowledge of growth has also happened since 1950. If you look at these graphs, patents have increased since 1950 exponentially, and so has the number of PhDs.
Mm.
And that means an explosion in technology as well, exponential growth, especially in computer sciences and
Yes.
information technology. So this graph from the Singularity website shows that right now, if you look at the left side of the graph, it shows the calculations per second per $1,000,
Wow.
and on the right hand side is the year, and you see this exponential curve. Right now in 2017, you can see we're at about 10 to the 10th power of calculations per second per $1,000. But if you now look at the curve at around 2050, we've hit this critical point of 10 to the 25th calculations per second per $1,000. That is the point where the chips in your phone at that time will basically equal all the computing power of all human brains on the planet.
Wow. Yeah.
Just to give you an idea of how we're moving on this curve, what kind of impact is that going to have to be able to have a computing device in 2050? 2050, how many years away is 2050 from 2016? That's like 2017. That's like 33 years.
Yeah.
Right? You and I will probably still be alive if we're lucky. Imagine having the compute power of the entire human race in one mobile phone.
Wow.
What kind of good can you do with that? But what kind of harm can you do with that?
Absolutely.
The thing is, technology it moves at exponential speed, but biological evolution moves at millions to billions of years. So our moral, our ethics are part of our biological being, part of our biological body. So how that takes millions to billions of years to evolve, and yet this cultural evolution is creating all these technologies that move in a few years. So this sets up a real dilemma because that's what Ronald Reagan
We're not
meant.
ready for it. Yeah.
We're not really, we're still killing each other, we're trying to find creative ways to kill each other. ISIS jihadists are they're trying to get out their hands on nuclear devices, right? What will they do in 50 years if we haven't evolved ethically and we're still trying to kill each other? And we have this huge capacity that everybody will have, What can we do with that technology? What can somebody who's thinking of harmful thoughts, what can they do to the entire planet? One person.
Sure.
So when we compare cultural versus biological evolution, we see that biological evolution is not biased, it's neutral, it doesn't care if human beings survive or not, If you have an adaptation that beats another species, then you'll win out, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have any preferences, right? There's no morality, no intention.
Yeah.
But human beings have biases. We're biased towards human beings. And we have intent. We want to survive. We want to outdo other species. We have a morality. We say this is right and that's wrong. And then our time scale for evolution.
And sadly, just on that, given that there is this nature of something happening, and not to dispel the good, because we want to acknowledge the good, it's not just to other humanity, it's to oneself.
Yes, exactly.
Which makes it even scarier.
So we are really in this conundrum, and that's why we need the deep humanity, because
Exactly.
we need to really understand what we are as human beings.
Yeah. Hmm. Bring
Jeffrey
humanity
West,
back.
yes, we have to not just go back, but it's like a spiral. We have to look at what we are, but
Mm.
gain a deeper understanding, a deeper wisdom of what we are.
Yeah. Hmm. And
Jeffrey
become who
West,
we really are.
yes, reach our highest potential.
Hmm.
Jeffrey West has this graph. He wrote this book called Scale, which is about how um, his research into biological systems connects to the growth of cities as well.
Hmm.
And this is a graph, a famous graph from his book that shows how cities grow and shows how cities consume exponential resources, and they grow in an unbounded fashion
Hmm.
unless there's enough innovation that can avoid that collapse. But the time scale for each innovation shrinks with each generation. So cities grow larger and larger, and to actually prevent them from exploding, we have to innovate at a higher rate than that growth, so that we don't explode.
Hmm.
And but that innovation is happening in a tighter time frame.
Hmm.
So progress, we have to be careful what we wish for, because we often wish for things and they come true, but then it has unintended consequences, the progress trap.
Sure.
So all these things that we've done, we've done all these intended consequences, we've had all these intended consequences,
Hmm.
but they've also had just as powerful unintended consequences.
Yeah. Hmm.
And so this is just a cloud of climate change and all the different aspects of climate change. This just shows the complexity that we're facing. You know,
Mm.
we have
Wow. Yeah.
we have progress, but progress leads to progress traps, all these unintended consequences. So you have multiple progress traps interacting with each other in unknown ways. And we have
Hmm.
shrinking time windows to respond to all of this.
Hmm.
So in essence, what we've done is uh, we're like Icarus, the
Yes.
story of Icarus, who fashioned these wax wings and flew to the sun,
Uh-huh.
uh, a bit arrogant, saying, I can fly, I can fly, I can do this, I can fly to the
Yeah.
sun.
Hmm.
But flew too close to the sun, and the wings started melting and now plummeting to the. So,
Hmm.
in a sense, our progress, human progress, is in this situation of being Icarus.
Yeah.
You know,
Mm.
and there we have a summary of deep humanity.
Wow. That's deep.
And it's humanity. It's what we are. It's
It
what
is.
we
It's
become.
beautiful.
So
It's
there's
beautiful
nobody to
and
blame.
frightening, and yeah. Mm.
There's nobody to blame. It's except us.
Yeah,
You know,
for
we
sure.
shouldn't. One of the things in deep humanity we learn is that we from this common human denominator, this common seed, we're born with all this potential.
Yes.
Nature and nurture. When you have a new being born on the planet, a new baby, that baby can become anything, right?
Exactly.
Of course, that baby is limited by nature as well. Maybe it's got a deformity or something or whatever. It's unique as well that way. But the average human being is born with a huge amount of potential to become anything. We
Hmm.
can mold that human being into many different directions.
Yes.
We can mold that person into somebody who hates people and wants to
Hmm.
destroy people, or we can
Hmm.
mold that human being into somebody who's loving and compassionate.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
so when we look at the world out there, and we see 7 billion people.
Mm.
By and large, those 7 billion people have been molded by their circumstances in life.
Hmm.
And what that means is we could have been any one of those 7 billion people, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Which means we should have compassion for all those people, because we could have
Mm.
been them if we had been born to a different parent or a
Yeah.
different culture or a different circumstance. But we
Absolutely.
need to use that knowledge to actually have a deeper understanding
Mm.
and understand the fragmentation and the divisiveness that
Hmm.
separates us,
Yeah.
and help that will help us to come together.
Hmm. Exactly.
because we need to come together now.
Mm-hmm.
There's a very short time window to act.
Yes.
And so the next time we will speak about the outer
The other journey.
transformation, the social
Mm.
exterior transformation, the
Mm-hmm.
cosmolocal.
Yeah.
How is it that we can empower the sleeping giant of all these billions of people who want change and transition but feel disempowered,
Yes.
don't have the resources to? How do we actually, they do have the resource, but how do we interconnect all those resources in a meaningful, systematic way so that we can actually all move in the same direction?